Hello, today I'm going to paint a picture with some washing in. So I'm going to start with some easy roofs to set the tones. I've got a little building here with some roof lights that's quite fun and a white building next to it. So just put the roof in very lightly and then I can give the suggestion of slates in a minute. And there's some of the same colour on the chimney, so I'm just going to put that in. And then add a little bit of the Payne's grey just to give a little bit of colour separation. And then there's a lovely old pub here that's in a slightly different position. It's got yellow lichen on the front. So I'm going to start with mixing the Payne's grey and the homemade grey, which gives me a colour that doesn't clash with the two I've already done. And then just water it down a little bit to allow me room to put the bright yellow on the top, but I don't want the white paper showing through. And I'm going to use what looks like an orange for the lichen, which is Indian yellow, and I'm just going to add some yellow ochre to it and put it on from the opposite direction. It might look a bit bold, but there's a lot of white in this picture, so it'll show it up nicely. And then get the clean brush and dry it, and then just lose the edge slightly. Now let's set the scene now. I'm bringing you forward to the harbour area. I'm now just going round and adding any other little bits of roof that I can find or walls to lose more white paper. So again, I'm mixing all the colours on my palette and a little bit of the lichen colour. And just go round the harbour wall, which changes height. And then I've got moored boats, so I'll go round those. But don't be afraid of a village. If you look at it, it's all triangles and rectangles. There's nothing to worry about. And it's darker at the bottom, so in a moment I'll put a second coat on the bottom in brown, which is the tide mark. And going back to the first colour again, to go round the moored boats and the white wall, trying to make it quite strong with the white wall. And round the boats, which have got white tops, gunnels, and the reflection in the water's quite dark. So again, I'll put the brown paint on in a minute, but I've just claimed the space. Then the wall goes round a little corner and further back. Well, there's a few bits of white on the boat, so I'll leave a few gaps. Then add a little bit of yellow ochre. It's not mud, it's just sort of where the tide goes in and out, and it just leaves a very dark line. And then a little bit of red. I don't want it to be one colour or another, I want it to match the red boat. So I'm going to put that in now sideways. Just drift it in on top of the already wet paint. Let it find its own marks. And it's not quite level at the top, sort of a random mark, so I'll just take the brush for a walk. If you mix a dark colour out of several colours, you won't get a clash, it'll all harmonise because the other colour will be somewhere on the painting. And that gets lighter as it goes up. So to show that, I'll just put the paint in without it being solid, and I've got a rusty ladder to put in a little while. So for the rust colour, I'm going to use Indian red or Venetian red, any colour that you've got like that, and mix it with the lichen colour just to bring it up a little bit. And while it's still wet, I'm just going to give a suggestion of it. Don't have to do every detail. Now I've got a wooden pole here. So I'm going to pick a slightly bigger brush. And again, use the same brown colours. Just mix them a little bit. Because it's a different material and it's nearer. I picked a bigger brush so that I can go all the way down the edge, and it's not perfect. It has been weathered over the years and cut roughly. And it's got much darker lines on it. So go in with some dark paint. Put the brush more on its point. This will need a second coat probably to make it have a good texture, but the first coat will start things off nicely. And I've got one more roof I can put in the distance that can dry and it won't get knocked. So I'm going to go back to a smaller brush again and the more bluey grey. The roof's facing a different direction, it's catching the light so it's not too dark. So now it's brought the focus into the middle. And I'm just going to use a tiny bit of very diluted lichen colour because there's a window frame. And give it some shadow. Now the emphasis is being brought forward now to the washing. So to start with, there's a mast of a boat. So that we don't forget it. And it also helped with the colour balance from the washing and down. And it's got a red sail, so again I'll use the Venetian red or Indian red and just put the suggestion of a curled up sail down to the washing. Now the boats are also showing underneath at the bottom, but we'll start with the washing first. It doesn't really matter where you start because it all overlaps, but there's a yellow dress. So a yellow dress seems a good place to start, and it's quite an orangey yellow, so again I'll use some of the roof colour just to moderate it. And I've got a nice yellow triangle of the dress. So that's making the other garments show up as well. Then I've got a tiny gap and a little bit more of it. And then it appears underneath the rest of the washing. I've put in the edges of where I think the garment is. When you're sketching washing, it does move. And there are different shades, so go back with just a yellow with no orange in it. Just put it in. And then have some lost and found edges around the other garments. And then I've got a little bit of shade, so I'll just tint the colour again. It's easier to do it while it's still wet than to come back. and a little bit of dark where it's wrapping over the line at the top. Might not seem much, but it might make a difference. So that's painting in the negative, leaving the whites out. A very brave person here. They've got whites and reds in the same wash. I'm now going to return to the washing so that the picture's getting equal treatment. And I'm particularly attracted to anything that's not white so that I can get some colour definition in. And there's a hanky with a dark border, and put in the hanky, and then that gives me some shape and form to the rest of things. We all remember these in department stores at Christmas. Buy a packet of hankies. It's got a little curve on it now that I've got the lines in. And just use some Payne's grey. Just put a few little shadows in. And then I've got something that's bright red that's quite fun. So I'm going to add that. I'm using a number 1 brush at the moment. I will use something bigger, but I just wanted to be definite with the shapes. So changing to a bigger brush. Got number 4. Just follow the shapes down. If you're trying this at home, you want to try it with smaller items rather than trying it with giant sheets. And then I can put some shadows on that again when it's dry. I'm always fascinated by the fact that it's longer of one side than the other. Then I've got something dark and patterned, so I'm going to use some purple with the red and the brown, mix them all together so that I haven't got a colour clash. It's important to get harmony. You don't want one thing sticking out more than it should be. It's an overall picture. When you're sketching washing, it does move and the light changes, so it's a good idea to practice indoors with it over a chair. I'm just going to add wet into wet now, just to give a little bit of variety. And this has got like a paisley design on it, so I'm going to get a yellow ochre and just put a few swirls in, and the change in pigment will give a chemical reaction and separate things. And then I've got more white, and then I've got something that's much lighter but still slightly red, so I'm going to mix some Indian yellow, or you could use yellow ochre, in. I'm just going to add some red at the top. And then this garment has got stripes. But because of the way it's hung, they are horizontal, in most cases, and then a red border at the bottom. And then in front of the yellow dress, there's something else with a pattern. So again, just going back to the colours I've used already, and I'm just going to take the brush for a walk. Then add some different pigment just from the palette, nothing else. Just drop it in. Suggesting things, not putting in every single detail. And I can put some creases on that when it's dry. And I've got one item that's grey, so I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre and a Payne's grey to make it a warm grey, because it's nearer than the grey roofs. And these things aren't all going down to the bottom. Some of them are stopping short, and so I can see boats through. And just some blue creases. Most of the things are going to have a crease or a shadow when they're dry. But that's just given the suggestion of it, and everything else on the line is white. Now I could add grey, but I've got a lot of grey, so what I can do is add alternately a delicate yellow and a blue to get the colours of the folds of the washing. So that was a number 4 brush. I'm going to see if I can find something slightly smaller. Go back to a slightly smaller one, and I'm going to mix up some French ultramarine and another puddle of Naples yellow, and just put in a few creases the way the washing is being hung. If it's obviously lots of things have a crease when you hang them up. I'm now going in with the blue in between those colours. That just separates them slightly. And now I will try some grey just to separate it from the next garment. So I've got a shadow underneath here where one short thing finishes. Just bleed it down to a lost edge. And you can keep going and going on this, but you've got to decide on the level of detail that's appropriate. This isn't the biggest pad in the world. I think it's an 8 by 10. So I don't need that much detail. Just get the water and bleed the blue paint out slightly. That still looks white, but it's got some definition. And there's several short things hung together. So looking is the shadows, looking for is the shadows underneath them. And then just to put in a few lines. Some of the items look newer than the others, so they're brighter white or different fabric. So just a few lines just to show, and then something here looks quite yellow compared to other things. when you do buy something new, it always looks the brightest, lightest one in the drawer. And then when that's dried off a bit, I can just add a few more details. If you had the sun shining through, it would have the same effect, that some areas would look lighter than others. I'm just mixing up a very dark colour because next to the white vest here is complete shadow. So I'm just going to make it as dark as I can. It's a reflection of the water in shadow. And it's a bit like a chessboard. If you can get the very darks and the very lights next to each other, it gives more visual effect. And then another garment hanging. The more you look, the more you see. But this is just as I found the situation. You could make it much simpler for yourself. I'm just going to put some pegs in. So many times you go painting and there's plastic pegs. It's nice to be able to paint wooden ones. So that's now brought that so much more forward than the cottages. So I need to return, give it a moment to dry before I stick my arm in it, and go back. Now I've got a building here that I can put in, so I can do that without smudging it. So returning to yellow ochre, which I'll just stir in with the nearby colours, and add a building it is a stone building. So I'm going to make the shape, and then I'm going to add yellow, which will chemically send the other colours back and give highlights of the stone. It goes all the way down the side of the post. I've painted in Polperro quite a lot over the years. So that's made the shape of the building. So now I want to go in with something with yellow in to show the shapes of the stones. So what I'm going to do is use yellow ochre and Naples yellow this time. Just drop it in, wet into wet. Just to show the stones. And I'm going back with grey for what the age of the building will be lime mortar. Just dropping that in while it's still wet as well. And it will give a gentle effect of stones. Don't want it too busy. Now it's really highlighted the white building now. So the next thing I can do is put in the key, which is a very, very pale grey, but it's quite warm. So I'm going to add some yellow ochre to it and just go sideways. I can put in any, well, we would say street furniture for somewhere more modern, but any mooring poles and things and rails in on top of it. There's a lovely white building here, and again I use the same treatment as I did with the washing, that it will be warm and cool colours against each other to give the effect of the stones that have been whitewashed. So I will use very weak Naples yellow and very weak French ultramarine and some grey. Any grey will do. So I'll start with the blue and just put in a few lines to show that it's not a flat surface, that the light is catching it in certain directions to show the stones. Clean the brush off, use a very weak Naples yellow in between that. Just to show how the light's catching the different layers. Having given the washing a chance to dry, I'm going to return to the back of the picture to just put in a little bit of detail, not too much, to add some colour changes. And I've got turquoise woodwork on one cottage, which is quite good. I'm using a small brush and it's all straight lines really, so don't be afraid of it. It just breaks up the picture slightly and it's interesting to give a different colour. And they're very thin window bars, so I'm going to change to a different brush to do the very thin ones. And again, just put them in. If you're worried about it, leave them out. So returning to the first brush for the thicker window bars. And recharging the paint a bit more. Because there's so much white, this needs to be quite strong. Just giving this a moment to dry. I'm just going to stick a little bit more on. Just use some water to soften the edge. There's a little bit of shadow in that area. Now I'm going to go back to a thinner brush and just put a few crossbars in, but I don't need that many because this one has actually got curtains in the window. There's a few other things that I can just add which will just give a punch of colour. There's a sign that I can put in, and these buildings have got a black edging. I don't have black in my paint box, but I found an older paint box that's got some dark colours in, so I'll see what I've got that I can make it darker. If you buy a different brand of paint, the colours can vary. So I've got a different brand of Payne's grey here that's quite dark. Add a little bit of the red to it and some blue. Whoops. Get it as dark as I can so that it's different from the other colours I've put down. I'm just going to find a friendly brush, size 4, and start with putting the lines in. Well, you find the shape, and then if you drop some paint in, make it darker. Then there's a gap, and again drop some paint in, leaving a gap for a post. And I'll just put this little piece of black edging in as well. Now, whilst that's all drying, I can move into the middle with the reflections. So the first thing to do is to put in the red boat. And there's a little reflection of it I can do at the same time. And having got the shape, let's go in with a little bit stronger paint. Let it find its own way. There is some writing on the boat, but I'm going to ignore that for the moment and just take the red further back. I've got a boat moored underneath the washing, which I'm going to put in partly as it's dark, and so it make the washing stand out as being brighter. So I'm just putting a line in for the top of the boat, the gunwale. There's also a gate, but I'm not necessarily going to put the gate in. So I'm just going to bring the boat round to a tip. And it's quite dark, so I'm just going to use a slightly bigger brush and make up a darker colour. It is a dark blue, but it's in shade, so I'm using Indigo on this occasion, which will make the whitewashing sparkle. Painting's all about colour change and harmony, just to make the emphasis on one part or another. Doesn't need anything else other than an angled top. Leave the rest to your imagination. And then the other side of it, because we've got the point, you just have to decide where it's coming. So I think we'll go for there. Just put a little bit in. That makes it look like a boat. And then we've got the mast that's already showing it in a different area. And then the washing covers other areas. So what I've got to do in a moment is bring some of the shadows of the washing down. So while that's drying, I'll go on to some other areas just to take the emphasis off the red boat, because it's a little dominant at the moment. So we've got some very dark water here. And it's really a greeny brown, so I'll start with the sap green, which is always a good starting point, and mix it with a dark colour that's already on the palette. And then it is a little bit brown, so we add some yellow ochre. Not quite dark enough. It needs to be dark to show the whitewashing. And the only reflection in that is really the ladder. So I'll put it in side to side. Round the furled sail. Around the pegs. When I've actually got it all wet, I can add some darker colour or the same colour again, and it'll find its own route, but need to have some degree of control to cover the space. And it's got some dark lines in it where the current's going. So just drop those in. Then I need a smaller brush, same colour, to go round the sail. If you're in doubt, always change to a smaller brush. And then there's a few bits of rigging that it's easier to leave a gap. You could go on top with white gouache, but it's easier sometimes just to leave a little gap. And again, drop another lot of paint in while it's still wet, just to be more firm about the contrast. And there's a few little ripples here that are more dominant. So now it's dried for a second, I'll put those in. Now this side there's more reflections of the white buildings, but not 100%. So there's a little bit of brown around the mast. So I'll put the greeny water in to start with. Then I need a dark nondescript colour, so I'm going to mix up some odd bits off my palette that have stayed there. You don't always need a definite colour, and there's the reflection of a telegraph pole, and I'm putting it in. It's a little bit of dark amongst the light is very good. And then there's another reflection that I can't quite make it out. Reflections you can't always immediately tell where they're from at times, but it's there, so I use it. Then I need a lighter colour, so I'm adding more yellow ochre, and I'm going to do some sideways reflections. Slightly lighter because it's just catching the light from a different angle. If you're painting on the spot, you have to just be very careful because the wind can change in a second and all the reflections are lost. Sometimes it's better to put the reflections and the boats in before you do the buildings, because they just up and sail away. And this is all adding the emphasis on the white wall. Now I've got some blue reflected. I'm going to use a little bit of turquoise because I want a lighter colour. And that's from this window here, is reflecting all the way down there. And then I've got a boat that's quite pale blue, so I'll put that in. Now there's a lot of reflections around the red boat, so I'm using the Payne's grey from earlier and mixing a little bit of red with it because the reflections do affect the local colour. So I'm putting the water in sideways. I will put a little bit more colour on the hull when it's dry. Just dabbing off the brush. It's not completely clean. Just putting it back in the red paint. I'm using a smaller brush and a little bit more red. Just lose the white paper. And sort of a lost edge. Now the next thing I need to do is to make some of the wall darker. So going back to the Payne's grey again. Going around the boats. And then that's got a lost edge, so just do sideways strokes just to separate it a little bit. All this is putting the emphasis on the washing. And the same down the back of the boat. Definitely a lost edge there in shadow from several directions. And a little bit more on the wall. And then the pub itself has got very dark blue windows, so I'm going to use French ultramarine and a little bit of indigo together, and just give a suggestion of them again, just so it's not all white. I'm just going back to some of the windows I did earlier and putting in a few lights and darks. All these little details give a little bit more emphasis to the whitewashing. And I can add a wall of a building above the White House here now it's dried. And this has got several different layers of materials. And there's a black sign with the pub name, a Blue Peter. Well, I'll just put in the black box for now. And the pub sign, which is hanging. So just put the edge of that in. Now I can return to the ladder because it's all dried. You can't do everything at once because it will just give you a fuzzy edge. So you have to come back. And just do it a little bit. And then again with the reflection, just a little bit. You need to show it's a reflection. And then on the edge of the harbour, got pieces of wood to tie boats to. And while I'm there, I'm going to get a bigger brush and make the post that's to tie a boat to at the end of the washing line a bit darker. So I'm mixing 2 or 3 colours together to get a dark brown. I'm just going to go over the far side of it just to give a good edge. Recharge the brush. Just needs to be brought forward. And it is very old and very nulled. So just bringing the paint down. It separates it from the wall and makes the washing look brighter. And makes that white house look brighter as well. And then, having checked my sketch, there's another boat at the bottom. So I'm going to put the inside of the boat in a warmer colour, because I don't want any more white. Now the washing comes over some of the boats at the end here, sort of waving around. So the next thing I can do is get a small brush and put in the boat cabin that's quite dark. can see the dark wall through the glass. And less so to the side, it's not quite so dark. And then the little boats on the edge. I need to get a little bit more shape and form into them. So it's always a gentle curve. And then there's a little storage cupboard under the front. Make that a little bit darker. And the turquoise one's got a similar system. It's got a little storage area at the front. But the way it's moored, it's pointing a slightly different direction. So I need some dark paint to paint in the negative and give it shape. This side's in shadow. And there's rope round it. Some people use plastic fenders and other people use rope. So we're just going to put the rope in. And a little bit more definition to the shape. And then painting in the negative again, doing the area around the boat. And then I've got a blue reflection and then a darker reflection. So I put the blue reflection in. And then it's the reflection of the wall. So I'm just mixing up a lot of colours from the palette just to give a watery, shady colour. Now the fishing boat needs a little bit more work. It's got two signs on it to give its identification. Polperro comes under foy, so it's got FY for the letters. And the first letter on the other side just goes under the cabin, so I'll just put the black in there to show it. And on this side it's just under the cabin edge again. Just put the black in. And then it's very dark where it meets the water, so we're just going to put a bit more shape in there. And a little bit of shadow inside the gunwale where you can just walk round to get a rope. And at the back, I'm just going to trim up the shape a little bit. Use a flat brush. And then on top, there's a darker area. So I'm going to go around the edge of the roof, the darker paint, giving it some shape. I'm going to let that dry for a moment and then square everything up. So I want to square up the roof again with a flat brush, give it a good shape. So I'm just going to take a little bit of the wall back. You could do this with latex before you started, but it doesn't really matter. Now there's a reflection of the boat. So again, the very dark colour. Just give some reflections of the wheelhouse. And then the wind is whipping over the harbour, so the reflections are a little bit lost with the reflection of the wind. So I'm just going to use a dirty blue. Don't want a clean colour, just to give a suggestion of the wind blowing across. Just dropping some other colours in as I go. Just add water to the brush and any pigment that's on there will just get pulled into the mix. And then I've got some dark green, so I'm going to use a sap green, some of the dark colours from the palette, and just put in a darker streak. Again, it's not solid, just moving around, and some of it's going wet into wet. I want to make this a bit richer, so I'm going to go over it with yellow ochre. But it's not clean yellow ochre. My brush has had an outing to the rest of the palette, just to make it a bit warmer. Never be in a rush to clean your palette off. And then I need some darks to go over the boat cuddy, just to show a little bit more detail. Now I need to do the wall that's very dark behind the boat, like a chessboard, that the dark squares show up the light ones. So I'm just going to go around with the brush, get the shape, and then pull the paint out with a damp brush. And there's some railings which I'm going to put in just to give a contrast. So put the uprights in first. And just use the wet brush, give a suggestion of the top. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed seeing a little snippet of the village of Polperro.